My husband replaced me with a younger woman on Christmas Eve. I sat on a bench shivering in the snow. When I saw a barefoot man turning blue, I took off my winter boots and gave them to him. 2 hours later, 17 black SUVs surrounded me. The man stepped out and simply said, "I'm glad to have you here." I have to ask, have you ever sacrificed your own comfort for someone else, only to have it change your life? Tell me your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from tonight. I'd love to know who's part of our community. 2 hours earlier, the air in our penthouse was so cold it could have cracked the marble floors. It smelled of ozone, imported lilies, and Michael's desperate ambition. He paced in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, checking his reflection more often than the time. Tonight was the New Year's Eve gala, the night he was supposed to land the contract that would define his career. "Jennifer, look at you," he said, gesturing at me with a half-empty glass of scotch. "You're just beige. The new firm is about the future. Sharp lines. Bold choices. You don't fit the aesthetic." I stood by the kitchen island, wearing the dress he had bought me 3 years ago. Back then, he said it made me look distinguished. Now, apparently, distinguished was code for expired. "What are you saying, Michael?" I asked, though the answer was already standing in the doorway. Ellie walked in. She was 26, wearing a silver dress that looked like liquid mercury. She held a bottle of champagne by the neck, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. She looked at me like I was furniture left on the curb for pickup. "We're rebranding, Jen," Michael said, adjusting his tie. "New year, new energy. I need someone beside me who looks like the future. You need to be gone before the guests arrive. Leave your keys on the counter." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. A younger version of me might have begged. But in that moment, a heavy quiet settled over my chest. For 20 years, I convinced myself my silence was strength. It was the invisible chain of the survivor. I had built a house of cards in my mind, believing that if I made myself small enough, if I fixed every mistake without asking for credit, the structure wouldn't collapse. I thought my compliance was the glue holding our life together. But standing there, watching Ellie pour champagne, I realized the truth. My silence hadn't been keeping me safe. It had been burying me alive. I walked past them into the bedroom. I didn't pack a suitcase. I took a single tote bag with my laptop, chargers, and my mother's old scarf. I stripped the identity of Michael's wife off my shoulders and left it on the bedspread. As I walked back to the front door, Michael was bent over the main table, reviewing the blueprints for the harbor project. He was muttering about zoning laws. I paused. I looked down at the wide sheets of paper. My eyes locked onto a glaring error. He had designed a glass atrium over the West Pier. I knew, because I had spent 3 weeks researching the archives, that the West Pier was a protected historical landmark. The city council would reject the permit on site. My instinct, honed by 2 decades of habit, was to pick up a red pen. To fix it. To save him. My hand actually twitched at my side. Then, I looked at Ellie whispering in his ear. I tightened my grip on my tote bag. I let the error sit there, a ticking time bomb in blue ink. I wasn't the safety net anymore. "Goodbye, Michael," I said. He didn't look up. "Leave the key card, Jen. Don't make a scene." I placed the plastic card on the cold table. The click echoed like a gunshot. I walked out, taking the elevator down 40 floors into the biting wind of the real world. The wind off the harbor wasn't just cold, it was personal. It cut through my thin blouse, hunting for the warmth stored in my bones. I sat on the metal bench of the bus stop, my knees pressed together. To my left, a man was muttering to himself. He looked like driftwood, a fixture of the city people walked past without seeing. He was older, wearing a windbreaker so thin it might as well have been paper. He was shivering violently. But he wasn't focused on the cold. He was wrestling with a notebook, cursing under his breath. "The tonnage, it doesn't match the pier depth," he rasped. 1892, no, 94. I stared at him. The words pulled me out of my misery. Pier depth. I knew those numbers. I had spent 6 months living in the city archives for Michael's project. "It was 1896, I said. My voice was brittle. The trade route didn't shift south until the Great Dredge of 1896. Before that, the West Pier could only handle shallow draft schooners. The man stopped flipping pages. He looked up. His eyes were startlingly sharp. The Great Dredge, he repeated. That's why the structural pilings are set 20 feet deeper on the north side. Exactly, I said, the librarian in me taking over. If you build heavy infrastructure on the south side without reinforcing the silt bed, the foundation cracks within 5 years. It's in the Municipal Geology Survey from 1902. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. It wasn't the look of a madman. It was the look of a man who had just found the missing piece of a puzzle. Of course, he whispered. The drainage runoff. He scribbled frantically, his hand shaking so hard the pen barely stayed on the paper. That's when I really saw him. His lips were turning a dangerous shade of blue. His hands were raw red knuckles. He was entering the early stages of hypothermia right in front of me. I looked down at my coat. It was a heavy down parka, charcoal gray. It was the most expensive thing I owned, my only shield against the wind. Without it, I would be nothing but a middle-aged woman in a cocktail dress sitting at a bus stop on New Year's Eve. But I looked at his hands. I thought about Michael, safe and warm in the penthouse, indifferent to the cold reality outside. I realized then that warmth wasn't something you hoarded. It was something you created. I stood up. The wind hit me instantly, stealing the heat from my skin. Stand up, I said. He looked confused. What? I took the coat off. The cold was a physical shock, a slam against my chest. I didn't hesitate. I stepped forward and draped the heavy coat over his shoulders. I zipped it to his chin. You're going to freeze, he stammered, looking at me like I had performed a magic trick. I'm tough, I said, wrapping my arms around myself, teeth chattering. Keep the heat in. He touched the fabric of the coat. He looked at me, really looked at me, and the sharpness in his eyes softened into something profound. You know the history of the harbor, he said softly. And you give away your only coat. Who are you? Just someone who knows what it's like to be cold, I whispered. He didn't say thank you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an object. It wasn't money. It was a compass. Old brass, tarnished by salt, the glass face scratched but unbroken. Hold this, he said, pressing it into my freezing palm. True north isn't a place on a map. It's character. And I think I just found mine. I looked down at the compass. The needle was pointing straight at him. Before I could ask what he meant, the hum of engines drowned out the wind. Lights flooded the bus stop. It wasn't a bus. It was a fleet. 17 black SUVs rolled into formation, boxing us in. Men in earpieces stepped out. I took a step back, terrified. The old man stood up. He didn't look like a shivering fisherman anymore. He straightened his spine, the heavy coat hanging off his shoulders like a royal cape. Right on time, he said. Mr. Sterling, one of the men said, stepping forward. Your core temperature dropped 2 degrees. The board is panicking. Let them panic, the old man said. His voice had changed. The rasp was gone, replaced by absolute command. Panic breeds efficiency. He unzipped my parka and handed it back. Underneath the thin windbreaker, I saw the glint of a silk lining. I'm Richard Sterling, he said, extending a steady hand. I froze. Richard Sterling. The tech mogul. The man Michael had spent 6 months and $50,000 trying to impress. Michael had bought a new wardrobe just to match Sterling's aesthetic. And here he was, standing at a bus stop. You're him, I managed. Michael has been trying to call you for weeks. I know, Richard said. I've seen his emails. Full of buzzwords and ego. He wants to build a glass monument to himself on my harbor. He gestured to the frozen water. I didn't come down here to see architectural renderings, Jennifer. I came to see the truth. I wanted to feel the wind. You can't design a future for a city if you don't understand its past. I needed to know if there was anyone left who actually gave a damn about the foundation. He looked at the notebook where I had corrected his data. My team missed the 1896 dredge, he said. They would have cost me $100 million in structural repairs. He stepped closer. You didn't just give me data. You gave me your coat. In my world, people don't give. They transact. They extract. He held up the compass. This belonged to my grandfather. He told me that true direction comes from character. For 10 years, I've been looking for a chief historical consultant. Someone who protects the history, not just bulldozes it. He pressed the compass into my hand again. The job is yours, Jennifer. $250,000 a year. Full benefits. And you answer only to me. I stared at him. $250,000. That was 5 times what I had made as a librarian. It was freedom. It was a door opening in a wall I had been banging my head against for 20 years. I don't have a brand, I stammered. Good, Richard said. I don't want a brand. I want a partner. The door of the lead SUV opened. Golden light spilled out. We have work to do, Richard said. The zoning meeting is in 3 weeks. And I suspect you have corrections to make to those blueprints. I looked back at the empty bench. I looked at the dark street that led back to Michael, back to being invisible. I didn't say goodbye to that life. I just turned my back on it. I stepped into the SUV. The door closed with a solid thud, shutting out the cold and the silence of the last 20 years. To the office, Richard said. We need to rewrite the future. 3 weeks. That's how long it took to realize that competence is a form of warmth. I wasn't working in a drafty apartment anymore. I was working in a mobile command center Richard had set up on the north side of the harbor. My job title was Chief Historical Consultant, but really, I was the gatekeeper. I sat at a mahogany desk, a red pen in hand, slashing through the proposals Michael's firm sent over. They were tragic. He had ignored the 1896 dredge line again. He was trying to put a load-bearing wall on a silt bed that couldn't support a lemonade stand. He's desperate, Richard said, walking past with coffee. He sent 5 emails this morning using words like quantum aesthetics. I think he's having a breakdown. He's not having a breakdown, I said, cold precision in my voice. He's running out of money. If he doesn't land this contract tonight, the firm goes under. It was just data. Then, my phone buzzed. A personal email from Michael. Subject, trash collection. Jennifer, since you're playing games, I'm clearing out your junk. That upright Steinway your mother left you. It doesn't fit the new decor. It's on the curb. It's going to rain in 2 hours. Come get it, or the garbage truck takes it. My hand froze. That piano wasn't junk. It was a 1920 Steinway. It was the only thing my mother left me. It was the heartbeat of my childhood. He knew that. He wasn't cleaning house, he was taking a hostage. I stood up, panic clawing at my throat. I needed a truck. I needed to run. Jennifer? Richard asked. I handed him the tablet. Richard read it. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. The way a grandmaster looks when an amateur uses a pawn to threaten a queen. He thinks because he's in the penthouse, he controls the building, Richard said softly. I have to go, I said. If it rains, the soundboard will warp. Sit down, Jennifer. The command was gentle but absolute. Richard walked to his safe and pulled out a blue folder. I didn't just hire you because you knew history, he said. I hired you because I knew who you were married to. And I knew that a man who builds glass houses shouldn't throw stones. He placed the folder on my desk. It was a debt acquisition form. Michael's firm has been leveraged to the hilt. He borrowed against the building to pay for his lifestyle. To pay for Ellie's car. To pay for the branding. The bank was going to foreclose next month. He tapped the paper. I bought the debt this morning, Jennifer. I own the mortgage on the commercial property. I own the lien on the penthouse. I own the chair he's sitting in. I stared at the numbers. 7 figures of debt, all transferred to Sterling Holdings. You bought his debt. I whispered. I bought his leverage, Richard corrected. He is currently trespassing on my property. And he is threatening to damage the personal property of my chief consultant. He pulled a single sheet of paper from the back. Proxy statement. This designates you as my proxy, Richard said. It gives you full voting power for the majority shareholder. Tonight, at the gala, that is you. He slid the paper toward me. You don't need to rent a truck. You walk in there as the owner. And you tell him that if he touches a single key on that Steinway, you will liquidate his entire life. I looked at the document. The panic in my chest evaporated. It was replaced by something colder. Stronger. I wasn't the wife scrambling to save her heirlooms anymore. I was the landlord coming to collect. The gala is in 4 hours, I said. Then we better get you a suit, Richard said. You have a board meeting to attend. The grand ballroom of the Maritime Hotel was a cage made of crystal and light. Michael had spent the last of the company's budget renting it. I walked in through the double doors, flanking Richard Sterling. I wasn't wearing beige. I was wearing a midnight blue power suit, tailored to within an inch of its life. My hair was pulled back. I wasn't hiding. I was arriving. On stage, Michael held a microphone, basking in the spotlight. Ellie stood behind him, draped in something sheer, looking like a trophy. Architecture is about shedding the dead weight of the past, Michael announced. We need to rise above the old foundations. He raised his glass. To the future. The room applauded politely. It was a room full of sharks, investors, zoning board directors. They were there to see if Michael could deliver. Then, Richard stepped into the light. The applause died instantly. A hush swept over the room. Richard Sterling didn't go to galas. His presence was a royal decree. Michael's eyes snapped to us. He saw Richard and lit up with greedy relief. Then, he saw me. His smile faltered. He blinked. He let out a nervous, incredulous laugh. Jennifer, he scoffed. Did you crash the party? Security. He waved a hand, dismissing me. Ellie giggled. I tried to tell her, Richard, Michael said, walking toward us, ignoring me completely. My ex-wife has a hard time letting go. It's sad. She doesn't understand that some people aren't built for this level. He reached for Richard's hand. Richard didn't move. Mr. Sterling, Michael said, freezing. I assume you're here to sign the contract. I'm here to observe the vote, Richard said. The vote? Michael frowned. I own the firm. I am the vote. Not anymore. Richard stepped aside, clearing the space between Michael and me. I'd like to introduce you to the representative of Sterling Holdings. She holds the proxy for the majority debt of your firm. She casts the deciding vote. Michael looked at me. He looked at the suit. He looked at the way I was standing, not shrinking, not apologizing. Her, he whispered. You gave the proxy to the librarian. I gave the proxy to the architect, Richard corrected. I stepped forward. I placed the blue folder on a cocktail table and opened it. The glass atrium over the West Pier, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried like a gavel strike. It violates the Historical Preservation Act. The city council would revoke your license for even proposing it. Michael's face went pale. That's a technicality. No, it isn't, I continued. Because you cited the columns on the south silt bed. The 1896 dredge line makes that soil unstable. If you build there, the atrium collapses into the harbor within 5 years. It's negligent homicide. I looked up at him. I tried to tell you that on New Year's Eve, I said. But you were too busy looking at your reflection to look at the blueprints. Michael stammered. He looked around the room for an ally, but the investors were backing away. They smelled blood. In that moment, I understood why he was crumbling so fast. For 20 years, Michael had confused having with being. He thought having the penthouse made him powerful. He thought having the contract made him a visionary. But those were just costumes. It is the delusion of power of the empty wallet. He had spent his life renting his status. He rented his genius from my research. He rented his confidence from the admiration of people he paid to clap. Now, the rent was due. And when you strip away the borrowed assets, you find out what a man actually owns. Michael owned nothing. His wallet, his character, his integrity, was empty. He was just a man in a rented tuxedo standing on sand. This is ridiculous, Michael spat. I built this firm. You were nothing but the help. And now, I said, the help is firing the management. I took the vintage compass out of my pocket and set it on top of the blueprints. The contract is denied. Sterling Holdings is pulling the funding. Ellie gasped. She dropped Michael's arm like it was burning hot. She looked at him, then at the door, calculating her exit. You can't, Michael pleaded. I have overhead. I have the lease on the penthouse. If this deal falls through, I lose everything. About the penthouse, I said, pulling one final document. As the new owner of the building's debt, I audited the tenant logs. You used company funds to pay for personal renovations. That's a breach of lease. I handed him the eviction notice. You have 2 hours to vacate. I suggest you take the stairs. I didn't wait for his answer. I turned around and walked back to Richard. Ready to go? He asked. Yes, I said. I have a piano to move. I watched him from the window of the mobile command center. It was snowing again. Down on the curb, Michael stood exactly where I had stood 3 weeks ago. He was wearing his tuxedo, shivering, a single suitcase by his feet. He looked small. He looked like a man waiting for an audience that had already gone home. A yellow taxi pulled up. It wasn't for him. Ellie stepped out of the shadows, wearing a stolen trench coat. She didn't look back at him. She got in the cab and slammed the door. The taillights faded, leaving him alone. I thought I would feel a surge of victory. I thought I would want to go down there and tell him that karma is a mirror. But I didn't feel any of that. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind something clean and quiet. I didn't need him to suffer. I just needed him gone. I turned away from the window. Jennifer? Richard called. I walked over. Spread out on the mahogany surface weren't blueprints for a glass tower. They were plans for the Sterling Community Center. A place with foundations deep enough to hold the history I loved. The zoning board just emailed, Richard said. They love the proposal. Specifically the preservation of the West Pier. They said it shows integrity. He smiled. Good work, partner. I sat down. I picked up the red pen, not to correct a mistake, but to sign my name. Next to the pen sat the vintage compass. The needle was steady, pointing true north. I touched the metal. For the first time in 20 years, I knew exactly where I was. I want to say something to you. To the woman reading this, sitting at a dinner table where no one asks her opinion. To the professional staying late to do the work while someone else takes credit. You think your silence is saving you. You think if you make yourself small enough, the storm will pass. You think being the invisible one is a strategy for survival. It isn't. It is a slow burial. They will not wake up one day and realize your worth. They will not suddenly decide to pay the rent on your soul. You have to evict them. Don't wait for a billionaire to find you at a bus stop. You are the architect. You are the builder. And you are the only one who can walk out that door and into the cold to find your own warmth. The world needs your voice, not your shadow. Be your own rescue. If this story reminded you that you are the architect of your own worth, share this video. Let's remind every woman that her silence isn't saving her, it's time to speak. Follow for more stories of truth and triumph.
I wasn't supposed to be in the program. That's what the official list said, what the glossy brochure handed out at every folding chair on the lawn confirmed. I searched 3 times, tracing each line with my finger, like a child looking for her name on a birthday card. It wasn't there. But hers was Abigail Hastings, marketing and brand innovation with distinction. Honors Cord noted my sister, who hadn't been enrolled since January, who had been quietly dismissed for academic dishonesty, low GPA, and what the student board called patterns of unverified documentation. She'd lied, she'd forged papers, and somehow she was still sitting near the front in a white robe. Her curls perfect, her lips glossed. My parents waved at her empty chair like she was backstage preparing to walk. I stood behind the last row, my gown wrinkled from being packed in a $7 garment bag. My hair was pinned up with 2 broken bobby pins. The chancellor's medal sat folded in an envelope inside my tote. They told me it would be announced, live. No prior mention, not even in the program. That morning, I'd eaten half a banana and washed it down with cold coffee. I had slept 3 hours the night before, finishing a final code review for a faculty-led research project on infrastructure decay in coastal bridges. It was already archived online under my name. The dean stepped up to the podium with a clipboard I hadn't seen before. He cleared his throat. "We have a correction before we proceed. One of our previously listed candidates, Abigail Hastings, is not eligible for graduation." Gasps spread like wind through dry leaves. I didn't look toward my parents. I didn't have to. I felt it. The freeze in the air around their row, the halt of clapping, the small sounds people make when someone's mirror shatters in public. Then the chancellor stepped forward, but excellence often lives in quiet places. Her voice cut through the silence like a clean blade. "Please join me in recognizing Engineering Senior Claire, Hastings recipient of the Chancellor's Medal for Academic Resilience." And just like that, they turned to face the daughter they never expected to walk the aisle. It started long before college. In our house, there was no loud announcement of favoritism, no shouting matches or cruel ultimatums, just quiet decisions always leaning in one direction. Abigail got her acceptance to Lindale University, first early admission marketing track, full ride, no but. That didn't matter. My parents celebrated like she'd cured something. They ordered matching sweatshirts. My father reactivated his Facebook just to post the news. When I got mine 2 weeks later, a full scholarship to Whitmore's engineering program, my mother smiled politely and said, "That's wonderful, Claire. You always were so resourceful." That was the first time she used that word, resourceful. It became their reason for everything when they drained the college fund on Abigail's freshman housing deposit. They said I wouldn't need it. My tuition was covered. When Abigail called home, panicked over textbook costs, my father wired money that same afternoon. When I mentioned the $85 course fee for access to the simulation lab, my mother blinked and said, "Maybe your department has a grant." They always found ways to fund her needs. For mine, they found ways around them. Abigail called home twice a day. She'd FaceTime from rooftop parties, from Greek mixers, from study abroad, interest sessions she never attended. She never asked how I was doing. She didn't have to. I had already become the backdrop. By my sophomore year, I was working 3 part-time jobs, tutoring undergrads in Calculus 3, running inventory for the campus bookstore, and hosting late-night segments at the university radio station. I ate whatever was on clearance in the dining hall, or what could be reheated on my contraband hot plate. My dorm roommate once asked why I set my alarm at 4:55 a.m. Because the data server is empty before 6, I told her, and I need quiet to run code. When I did call home, I made my updates short. Abigail had more interesting things to say anyway. I once told them I'd co-authored a paper on fault-tolerant load-bearing frameworks for climate-vulnerable bridges. My father said, "That sounds complicated." "Hey, did you see Abigail's new internship?" Her boss said she's a natural resourceful. 2 different daughters, 2 different languages. They didn't see the hours. The hours I stood outside career fairs I wasn't invited to. The hours I spent debugging infrastructure models on borrowed equipment. The hours I sat alone in dark labs because my housing didn't renew and I couldn't afford a deposit. My mother sent Abigail new heels for her capstone showcase. She sent me a thumbs-up emoji when I emailed about getting published in the Whitmore Civil Engineering Review. The truth is, I never expected equal treatment. I just wanted acknowledgement. But that doesn't grow in the soil of families like mine. Not when one child shines loud and the other works quiet. It took me until junior year to stop waiting for praise. I printed my own certificate of the publication, laminated it, and pinned it behind my desk lamp. On days I didn't have food, I'd stare at it like proof I existed. That spring, I passed Abigail in the student center. She didn't see me. She was laughing with friends, holding an oversized iced coffee. Her nails glittered in the sun. She said something like, "My sister's still in engineering, like actual math. It's wild." They all laughed. I didn't stop walking. I had a lab to open, a network to train a bridge to hold, even if nobody else noticed it was cracking. By senior year, I had stopped trying to catch anyone's attention, especially theirs. My world shrank into clean routines: the morning walk from the commuter lot, the coffee machine in the engineering hall that sputtered before 8 a.m., the third computer terminal from the left in the structural modeling lab, the only one that didn't crash during neural net runs. I kept a notebook filled with hand calculations, one that smelled faintly of printer toner and sleepless nights. It never left my bag. It wasn't sentimental. It was armor. On the inside flap, I taped a Post-it I'd written my first semester. Earn the dawn. I don't remember where I got the phrase, maybe from a podcast, maybe I made it up, but it became my spine. When the sky turned pale blue and the rest of the campus slept, I'd be hunched over load charts and failure graphs chasing a degree. Nobody expected me to finish. Professor Reed was the only one who noticed. She taught advanced structural systems with the kind of calm that felt earned. One evening after a colloquium where I presented my work on fracture detection in coastal pylons, she pressed a folded note into my backpack without saying a word. I found it hours later buried between power bars and class rubrics. "You are the quiet engine of progress. Keep building, IR." I read it once, then again, and then slid it behind my Post-it. That night, I stayed in the lab until 2:40 a.m., eating dry cereal from a Ziploc and running simulations until the motion sensor lights flicked off. I waved my arms to turn them back on. It felt like the room understood me better than people ever had. Meanwhile, Abigail uploaded a filtered photo of a frozen margarita with the caption, "Spring break is a mindset." I saw it only because a mutual friend tagged her. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known where she was. The next morning, I walked into the machine lab, wet shoes squeaking on concrete. I had just learned that our bridge model had taken first prize at the Midwest Civil Systems Conference. The faculty team nominated it for a national research track. I forwarded the email to my parents. My mother replied with a single sentence, "I'm sure that'll look great on your resume." Abigail posted a video of herself dancing barefoot on a beach patio. Later that week, I overheard two faculty members discussing a university grant Abigail had supposedly received for a marketing capstone. Except the course she referenced didn't exist. The professor had left the department 2 semesters prior. It didn't take long to uncover more. She had forged summer enrollment forms again, emailed doctored screenshots of tuition receipts to my parents, and had the refund rerouted to her own account. With it, she rented a vacation house on the Emerald Coast. She didn't even hide it well. A friend's photo caught her holding a drink with a slice of watermelon the size of her face, standing on a balcony with ocean wind in her hair. That same day, I was in the sub-level lab, hands covered in graphite dust, adjusting load cells with a wrench that kept slipping. My back ached. My stomach churned from too much vending machine trail mix. I closed the window on her image, not in anger, just to protect my focus. I didn't tell our parents. I didn't report her. I was tired, and tired, I had learned, wasn't the same as broken. The medal announcement came 2 weeks later, an email with no subject line. "Claire Hastings will receive the Chancellor's Medal for Academic Resilience. Presentation is scheduled for commencement. Please do not publicize." I read it 3 times, then I clicked archive. It wasn't disbelief, it was something colder, something more precise. I had already built the bridge. Now they could decide if they wanted to walk across it or not. The email came quietly, no fanfare, no emoji, no accidental CC to the family group thread. Just a few lines from the dean's office per Chancellor Directive Medal recipient to remain unlisted until ceremony. Seating arranged accordingly. "Please confirm your attendance," I typed. Confirmed. Then I closed the laptop and unplugged it from the surge protector I shared with the lab's 3D printer. The night before graduation, it rained. Not a storm, not the kind that made headlines. Just that thin, constant southern spring rain, the kind that soaks through cheap umbrellas and metaphors. Alike, I stayed late on campus. Not working. Just walking. I passed the student center, the library steps, the vending machine that once gave me 2 granola bars for the price of 1, little grace notes scattered between years of noise. As I circled the back of the old art building, I saw someone sitting on the hood of a borrowed car. Even from a distance, I knew it was Abigail. Her hair was wet. Her mascara had carved 2 perfect tributaries down her cheeks. In her lap, a crumpled envelope stamped, "Notice of Academic Dismissal." She didn't see me at first. I approached slowly, quietly, like I might scare her into disappearing. When she did look up, her eyes were wide with something not quite fear. "Don't tell them," she said, voice hoarse. I didn't answer. I thought maybe they'd let me walk anyway. If I kept smiling, if I wore the robe. I didn't respond. I didn't ask why she lied, or how long she'd been planning it, or how much money she'd rerouted into rented balconies and plastic cups with pineapple rims. She looked down at her phone. Amber's still texting about the after party. Like none of this matters. I should have said something, anything, but the words felt irrelevant. Not cruel, not angry, just unnecessary. "I guess shame is still negotiable," she whispered. That was the last thing she said before I walked away. The next morning, the quad was all ready, half filled by 7:45. Folding chairs in tidy rows, honor cords gleaming, faculty robes fluttering in the breeze like prayer flags. My hair wouldn't hold the last pin, so I left it crooked. It didn't matter. I stood near the back with the engineering majors. My name wasn't in the program. There was no proud family post on social. My father had emailed the dean asking for special seats for Abigail. He wrote, "Our eldest daughter is receiving honors. We'd like to be near the stage." The dean's assistant replied politely, said the seating was general admission. Abigail's seat sat near the front, draped with her robe. My parents didn't notice it was empty. They waved, they smiled. They waited. They didn't know they were waiting for someone else entirely, and I didn't rush to meet them because I wasn't returning to be seen. I was returning so the silence would finally end. Halfway through the ceremony, the dean paused. She leaned toward the chancellor, who consulted a second clipboard, one that hadn't been on the podium earlier. A rustle moved through the crowd. Some parents shifted in their seats. A few students looked up from their phones. Then the dean stepped forward again. Her voice was steady, but it had a new edge. "We wish to acknowledge a correction to our previously published list. Abigail Hastings is not eligible for graduation and will not be receiving a degree at this time." It didn't echo. It didn't need to. The silence that followed did all the work. I didn't turn to look at my parents. I could feel the shift. Could imagine my mother's mouth half open, her hand frozen mid-wave. My father's fingers tightening around the program as if it might rearrange itself with enough pressure. A low murmur rolled through the seating rows. Not outrage, just discomfort. That collective flinch people do when the story they've accepted starts to tear at the seams. Then the chancellor stepped forward. But she said, looking up from the page, "Excellence often lives in quiet places." A pause. "Please join me in recognizing Engineering Senior Claire Hastings, recipient of the Chancellor's Medal for Academic Resilience." For a moment, no one clapped. Then a single burst of applause scattered tentative like rain, tapping on a tin roof. And then the rest followed. I didn't look up. I walked the aisle with my eyes on the path ahead, past rows of caps, proud parents, confused siblings. The medallion they placed around my neck was heavier than I expected. Its weight surprised me. Or maybe it was just the moment finally catching up. When I returned to my seat, I didn't glance back. I didn't need to. They'd seen. After the ceremony, I waited by the stone fountain near the south end of campus, the one where graduates traditionally signed their initials in chalk. I didn't bring chalk. I brought a copy of my research paper and folded it into my coat pocket. Old habit. I heard their footsteps before I saw them. My mother still in heels too high for gravel. My father holding the program like it had betrayed him. Abigail trailed behind them, clutching her robe like a costume she hadn't earned. "Claire." My mother said first. It wasn't a greeting. It was a question disguised as my name. "Why didn't you tell us?" she managed. I looked at her. Her eyes were rimmed in mascara shadows. "I did," I said. You just weren't listening." Abigail lowered her gaze. Her foot traced a nervous circle in the dirt. "I mean, we didn't know," my father added as if that made it better. "I sent the paper to your email," I said, "the one about adaptive load response and suspension bridges." "You never opened it. That's not what we're talking about," he snapped. "We're talking about your sister, about this morning." "No," I said, voice calm. "You're talking about embarrassment. I'm talking about patterns. They didn't speak." I pulled the metal from around my neck and held it level. "This isn't just mine," I said. "It belongs to every late shift, every skipped meal. Every night, I slept in the lab because my housing fell through and I didn't want to ask for help." My mother let out a breath that was almost a sob. Abigail took a step forward. "So what?" she said, her voice thin. "You get to be perfect and I'm the villain." I looked at her. Really looked. "I'm not perfect," I said. "I'm tired, but tired isn't the same as broken." She blinked. Those 6 words landed harder than anything else I'd said. She turned her face away. My father folded the program, precisely as if he needed to control at least one thing in that moment. "I just don't understand," he muttered. "Why hide it? I wasn't hiding," I said. "You were looking the other way." The silence that followed was different than before. It wasn't awkward. It was conclusive. I turned back toward the quad, toward the empty stage, toward the crowd that had already started leaving. "Where are you going?" my mother asked softly. "To start something," I said. "Something that doesn't require anyone else to clap for it." Then I walked. Not fast. Not defiantly. Just forward. I didn't go to the family dinner that night. They'd made reservations months ago under Abigail's name. Of course, a steakhouse downtown with white tablecloths and chairs that scraped the floor too loudly. I imagined the 3 of them sitting there trying to explain the silence on the ride over, trying to rewrite the morning into something survivable. I spent that night folding laundry in the corner of my apartment, the one off campus I shared with 2 nursing students. My phone buzzed once, a message from my mother. "Proud of you. Let's talk soon." I didn't reply. 3 weeks later, I boarded a flight to Seattle. It was a one-way ticket. I had accepted an offer from a structural engineering startup, entry-level modest pay, but full autonomy and access to projects that actually mattered. Floating bridge systems, tide-resistant pylons, infrastructure that adjusted in real time, things that held weight. On my first day, I pinned the chancellor's medal to a corkboard above my desk, not centered, just enough to be visible. Beside it, I taped the post-it I'd carried for years. "Earn the dawn," and Professor Reed's note, faded but intact. "You are the quiet engine of progress." At lunch, I sat alone by the windows and watched gulls circle over the harbor. I pulled out a pencil and began sketching the early version of a load distribution model. Soft curves, tension lines, notes in the margins. It was the first time in years that my hands moved without exhaustion. Justice isn't a moment, it's a structure. Something you build, slowly, beam by beam, until even the people who doubted the blueprint stand beneath it and call it shelter. In July, my mother emailed again. The message was longer this time. She wrote about refinancing the house, how they'd used part of what was meant for Abigail's tuition to settle debts. There was something apologetic in the phrasing, though the word sorry never appeared. She attached a photo of my father fixing a broken porch step. She called it progress. I forwarded it to my archive folder. Fall in Seattle came fast. The air turned sharp, salt mixed with pine. I bought a second-hand coat and began walking home from work, just to feel something shift between me and the pavement. On Thanksgiving morning, a letter arrived. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. Inside was a single photo. Abigail, hair pulled back, standing beside a brick wall, holding a Habitat for Humanity hammer. Her smile was sheepish. Below, she'd written, "Beams don't care who hammers them, they just hold." I pinned it beneath the post-it. Not as forgiveness, just as proof. One Friday evening, the company invited me to speak at my alma mater, Whitmore, during Alumni Week. I almost declined, but then I thought of the fountain of the chalk basin filled with names. I returned quietly. No fanfare. After my talk on adaptive systems and failure recovery, a student approached me. First year, nervous eyes wide. "Do you ever wish they noticed earlier?" she asked. Your family, I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "No, I just wish I had stopped waiting sooner before leaving campus." I walked to the old fountain. It was freshly washed, names erased, a clean slate. I took a piece of white chalk from my bag and wrote 3 small letters near the base, CH. Next to it, I drew an anemometer, my first science fair project back in 5th grade. It had measured wind speed with plastic spoons and a straw. My father never came to see it. Wind motion balance, the things that moved without applause. As I stood brushing dust from my hands, I looked out across the lawn where once they had clapped for the wrong child, not knowing the other was holding everything together. They couldn't erase me now because I was never invisible, just inconvenient to acknowledge. Now I was unignorable, and I wasn't waiting for them to catch up. "If you show up, we may not open the door." That's what my mother said to me 3 days before Christmas. Anger, not with heat, just that slow, low voice she uses when she wants to sound reasonable, when she wants to hurt you and pretend she didn't. It was nearly midnight in Asheville. I had just walked home through the sleet, my navy scrubs damp at the cuffs, breath still fogging the air. My 1-bedroom apartment smelled faintly of pine and peppermint. I had plugged in my little thrift store tree that morning, the same one I'd kept since nursing school, now blinking quietly in the corner. A suitcase sat by the door. Packed days ago, like always, with small thoughtful things I never forgot. The blood orange marmalade Dad liked with his toast, the lavender balm Mom used on her joints. A jigsaw puzzle for Daniel's girlfriend Tessa, who once mentioned loving coastal landscapes, all tied with ribbon and hope. My hands were still shaking from the cold when the phone rang. I smiled automatically when Daniel's name lit up. "Hey, big brother," I said, kicking off my shoes. He hesitated. "Elise," he began, already gentle, already too careful. "So, Tessa's coming to Christmas this year." I blinked. "Okay. She's been working on emotional boundaries lately. Energy stuff. And, well, with your job at the hospice, that energy, it's a lot for her sometimes." He cleared his throat. "So we were thinking, maybe this year you could just take a break." My fingers gripped the phone harder. "You understand, right?" he said quickly. "It's nothing personal." I was about to speak when the other line buzzed. "My mother," I answered. Her voice arrived in that warm, clipped tone she uses when she's wrapping poison in cellophane. "Elise, sweetheart," she said, "we just want peace this year. You know how sensitive Tessa is. If you show up, it could create tension. Honestly, if you come to the house, we may not open the door." I stood there in the dark, the blinking lights of the tree reflecting off the window. My body didn't move. My lips didn't part. The words weren't shocking, just final. They weren't angry. They were done. And I understood something then. I had never been invited. I had just never been told not to come. I ended the call, sat down on the edge of my couch, looked at the gifts, each one wrapped with hands that had washed the dying just hours before, each one prepared for people who no longer saw me as someone to include, only someone to avoid. And for the first time, I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't ask why. Instead, I listened to the silence. A silence I had spent years filling for other people. A silence that had never been mine. I reached for the one thing in my apartment that had always obeyed me. My laptop. I didn't open my laptop out of spite. I opened it out of instinct. The screen lit up with the same dull warmth as always, humming gently against the quiet. My hands moved without thinking. First tab banking, second payments, third family folder. The first thing I canceled was the monthly transfer I'd been sending to Daniel, $800 quietly deposited into his creative development fund. Ever since he'd left his last full-time job to focus on storytelling, I never asked questions. I never wanted him to feel small. Next, my parents' mortgage. I had set up the auto pay 5 years ago after Dad missed 2 property tax notices. I'd told myself it was temporary. It never was. That $1 $400 went out every month, like clockwork. I stopped it with 2 clicks. Insurance, the pickup truck I had helped co-sign when the rates got too high. Dental coverage. The second line on my cell phone plan labeled Dad, all of it severed quietly, neatly, not revenge, just release. I sat back, letting the stillness stretch. A candle flickered beside me, the wax slumped into the glass like a body too tired to hold shape. I remembered that feeling. I'd lived inside it for years. Growing up, I was always the dependable one, the steady daughter, the emotional sponge. I knew how to make casseroles and keep quiet. I knew how to talk gently to someone unraveling. I knew how to step aside, how to not be too loud, too strange, too anything. Daniel was the wild one, the artist, the golden son with mismatched socks and clever excuses. He crashed his car once and got a second chance speech from Dad. I dropped a glass in the sink and got the silent treatment for a week. When I got into nursing school, Mom said, "That's nice, honey, just don't let it turn you into someone cold." When I graduated top of my class, she sent a text, thumbs up. When Daniel released a 3-episode podcast about dreams, they hosted a listening party with wine and rosemary focaccia. I once found one of my old hospice journals tucked under their recycling bin, half covered in coupon mailers. No one had opened it. No one had asked. Still, I kept showing up. I drove home every Christmas with pies I baked myself. I repaired broken faucets, changed light bulbs, refilled prescriptions, refolded their shame. I never asked to be thanked, but I suppose I did hope quietly to be noticed. But I wasn't the story they told at parties. I was the quiet one, the background one, the one who held the camera so others could be in the photo. And when they asked me not to come this year, not angrily but softly, like a formality, I realized something sharp and heavy. I had never really been invited to that table. I had just kept pulling up my own chair and hoping no one would notice I closed the laptop. Let the room settle around me. Somewhere across town, they were probably folding napkins and wrapping matching sweaters, preparing a holiday designed to look whole with me. Carefully edited out of the frame, I didn't erase myself. I just finally stopped arguing with the people who had already done it for me. The next morning, I made tea. Cinnamon apple, the kind they always asked for when they came to visit. I let it steep too long, then drank it anyway. The tree in the corner blinked softly in the morning light. I didn't turn it off. I just sat with it like a guest in someone else's apartment. I reached for my notebook. Not the leather-bound one I kept for work, but the spiral one I always meant to throw out. On the first page, I made a list, debts I never asked to be paid back. I wrote them slowly. Daniel's broken laptop replaced with my own bonus, the vet bill when Mom's cat swallowed a ribbon, the time I paid their water bill without being asked because the pipes had already frozen, a plane ticket, a new mattress, a dental crown, a tire rotation. Some of the entries were so small they looked almost silly. Others startled me, not because I'd forgotten them, but because I hadn't realized they belonged on a list I wasn't keeping score. I was keeping record, not to throw it back, but to finally see it for what it was. When the list reached the bottom of the page, I closed the notebook and placed it gently into the freezer. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to preserve the evidence. Or maybe I just liked the thought of it sitting beside the frozen peas, getting colder and colder, while I finally got warm. That night, I unplugged the Christmas lights, not out of sadness, but because I didn't want them blinking at me like questions I no longer had to answer. The wrapped gifts went into the hall closet. Not hidden, just shelved. I might donate them. I might not. Right now, I just didn't want them watching me. I didn't text anyone. I didn't post online. I didn't write a long message about boundaries or betrayal. That wasn't my language. Instead, I filled out a form to remove my name from the shared cell phone plan. I mailed a check to myself for the exact amount of the canceled auto payments, not to cash, just to hold, just to remind myself I could. Then I made dinner. 2 eggs, spinach toast. I ate it slowly while snow pressed against the window like it was trying to get in. For so long, I'd believed love meant covering the cracks, fixing the leaks, making things feel okay. Now I understood maybe too late that some houses aren't meant to be repaired. Some houses are just meant to be left behind. I wasn't angry. Not exactly, but there was something steady rising inside me. Not fire, not even cold, just clearness. Like finally stepping into a room and realizing the door has always been open. I just kept asking for permission to walk through it. They had chosen comfort over connection, appearances over presence, simplicity over truth. I had played along for years, mistaking tolerance for belonging, but now the performance was over. They would gather without me, share meals, take photos, light candles, tell the same stories. They would forget to mention me or mention me carefully with vague regret and tight smiles. "She's doing her own thing," they'd say. "Work keeps her busy." They wouldn't say they asked me not to come. They wouldn't say they erased me. But this time, I wasn't the one who would keep that secret. I didn't need to confront them. I didn't need to prove anything, because the truth was already doing its quiet work, and soon it would reach them the way winter does. Soft, certain, unstoppable. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't send an excuse or a quiet apology wrapped in a Hallmark card. I simply didn't go, and for the first time, no one followed up. "No, where are you?" "No, Hope. Everything's okay." Just silence, polished and practiced. On Christmas morning, I stayed in bed longer than usual. The light outside was soft and gray, the kind that makes the whole street look like it's holding its breath. My phone stayed quiet. I didn't check it. I made oatmeal, added nutmeg and brown sugar. The kitchen felt larger than usual. Later, I sat by the window with a blanket across my knees. No Christmas playlist, no soft choral voices trying to patch things over. Just the hum of my radiator and the distant echo of someone scraping ice off a windshield down the block. It was peaceful, not lonely, just still. That afternoon, I opened a novel I'd started 3 times, but never finished. Got halfway through, made tea, folded laundry, reclaimed every small thing I used to rush through. I didn't think about the party. Not until my phone buzzed. First once, then again, then a third time, I ignored it. I'd muted every group thread weeks ago. But then a message came through separate from the rest. "Elise, can you answer? You've done enough damage already." It was from Tessa. Her name pulled something loose in my chest. I called her back. My voice was rough with disuse. "What happened?" She hesitated. "They're saying you ruined Christmas," she said gently. "But Elise, you weren't even there." Then slowly, like someone untangling a wire, she told me what happened. Sometime after dinner, Tessa had wandered into the den, a glass of wine in hand, and started admiring the framed photos lining the mantel. She paused at one, a faded picture of Daniel's 5th birthday. Balloons, a homemade cake. A tiny girl in a blue dress, laughing too hard for the camera to catch her face clearly. "That's you, right?" she'd asked. No one answered. She pointed again. "Elise, your sister. The one who sat with my neighbor when she was dying." Daniel went pale. Mom's smile froze like a wax figure. Someone dropped a fork. Tessa looked around. "Wait, is that the same Elise you said was too intense to be around for the holidays?" Still no answer, but the silence was louder than anything they could have said. Tessa excused herself, gathered her coat, and left early. Later that night, she posted something. Just a few lines. No names, no blame. Just truth. Sometimes families rewrite the people who hold them together. They call their grief heavy, their love inconvenient, and their absence disruptive. By morning, mutual friends had seen it. Cousins, colleagues, even a former neighbor commented, "Wait, is this about your sister?" The nurse. "I didn't even know you had one." The carefully curated version of the Monroe family, warm, united, generous, began to fracture. Quietly, like a hairline crack in a wine glass. Tessa's words didn't attack. They simply told the truth, and the truth did what it always does. It made the silence harder to maintain. That night, I didn't sleep right away. I sat by the window with the lights off, watching the wind push snow down the street in slow, whispering gusts. They had spent years pretending my presence was optional. Now, for the first time, they were learning how loud absence can be. The first email came the next morning. Subject line, "Let's reset things." No greeting, no apology. Just a string of carefully worded sentences that read like a corporate memo. Emotions were high. "We value family. It's important to move forward." But buried halfway down between lines about holiday stress and miscommunication came the real reason. "Would you be willing to reach out to Tessa?" Just to clarify. Things got misrepresented. Not because they missed me, not because they understood, but because Daniel's girlfriend had become unpredictable and they needed the mess cleaned up. I didn't reply. The second message came that evening, from Dad Shorter, less polished, We heard what Tessa posted. It's affecting people. Your brother's having trouble at work. Can we please keep this within the family? Keep what exactly? The truth that I existed, that I'd spent a decade wiring money in silence so they could keep pretending I didn't. That night, the doorbell rang. 3 slow chimes. No knock. Just a long, familiar silence hovering on the other side. I didn't move at first, just listened. When I finally stood and looked through the peephole, I wasn't surprised. My parents, Daniel, standing there in their nicest coats looking like a Norman Rockwell painting dipped in unease. Dad held a tin of cookies. Mom clutched her purse like it was a script. Daniel stood with his hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the floor. I opened the door just an inch, enough for the cold to slip in and sting my skin. "Sweetheart," my mother began, her voice trembling with artificial warmth. "We just want to talk?" I didn't respond. Dad cleared his throat. "We think this has all gotten out of hand. You've made your point." I tilted my head. Daniel finally looked up. "You didn't have to go nuclear." "Elise," I kept my voice low. I didn't say anything. They blinked. I opened the door just wide enough to step forward, not out but closer so they could hear me clearly. "You spent years pretending I wasn't part of this family. You made it official this year." Mom opened her mouth. "We didn't mean," I raised a hand. Not in anger, just to stop the noise. "I'm not here for a scene," I said. "I'm not angry." That part was true. I wasn't angry. I was done. I stepped back inside and gave them the only word I had left. "No." Then I closed the door. Not a slam, not a statement, just a quiet final boundary. They stood out there for another minute, voices rising then dipping. I didn't listen. I walked back to my chair, sat down, and picked up my tea, now cold. On the table beside me was the note I had written weeks earlier, folded and forgotten. Not a manifesto, not a letter. Just 3 lines I had scribbled to remind myself. You are not invisible. You are not responsible for their comfort. You do not owe them silence. Outside, the porch light flickered once, then steadied. Through the curtain, I watched as they turned and walked back to their car. They hadn't come to make peace. They had come to preserve the lie. But this time, I wasn't part of the cast. They didn't come back the next day. No more emails, no more texts. Just the strange hovering quiet of people recalibrating their narrative. I wasn't angry. I wasn't proud. Mostly, I was tired in that deep, quiet way your body feels after surviving something long and invisible. I started making space in my apartment. Not cleaning, just clearing. I put the Christmas gifts in a donation box, slid the suitcase back into the closet, dusted off the letter from Tessa still propped against the lamp. I read it again slowly. You didn't just sit with my grandmother when no one else did. You reminded her she mattered. You reminded me too. I didn't cry, but I did close my eyes and let the words land where no one had spoken to me in years, like I was someone real, not someone necessary. That afternoon, I framed the letter, hung it above my desk just beside the window where light moved across the wall like water. I didn't post anything, didn't text back. Cousins who suddenly wanted to reconnect. I let the silence grow. Not as punishment, but as reclamation. I wasn't hiding. I just wasn't performing anymore. A week later, a final message arrived. "We miss you. We didn't mean to hurt you. Can we start over?" And then, beneath it, the true purpose. Tessa still hasn't taken the post down. It's affecting Daniel's opportunities. That was all I needed to see. I closed the message, blocked the address, then shut the laptop with both hands. Not in anger, but like closing the back cover of a book I no longer needed to reread. That night, I lit a candle and sat on the floor with a mug of tea. Strong, hot, unshared. Snow was falling outside again, slow and steady. No storm this time, just silence in motion. I thought about all the years I had tried to be small enough to fit into the spaces they gave me. About all the versions of myself I had edited down to keep the peace, and how peace had never actually existed, only performance. They hadn't come to see me that day. They came for the version of me who still believed love was earned through disappearing. But that girl was gone, and in her place was someone who had finally stepped out of the frame. Not to scream, not to destroy, just to exist fully without asking permission. As I finished my tea, I looked around the room, still undecorated, still quiet. But for the first time, it didn't feel empty, it felt whole. My phone buzzed again. A notification from the hospice. A new patient had requested me by name. Someone remembered. Someone knew. I smiled soft private and reached for my coat. Outside, the world was white and quiet. Inside, I was still. And as I pulled the door closed behind me, I whispered the truth to no one but myself. I didn't vanish. They just built their holidays on the lie that I was never there.